here we are in the first week of Advent. And we know that Advent is a time for preparing for Christmas. But do you realize that we have Christmas only because of Mary, because of our Blessed Mother? We have Christmas because Mary said yes. You know, when the angel Gabriel came to Mary and asked her if she would be the mother of Jesus, Mary said yes. Fiat. She said, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. May it be done to me according to your word." In other words, Mary agreed to accept the will of God. You know, folks, we too have to say yes to God at all times. We have to accept His will. But let's face it, it's hard to accept God's will. It's hard to accept His will when a spouse says, "I want a divorce." It's hard to accept God's will when the doctor says it's cancer. It's hard to accept God's will when we get a phone call and we hear that a loved one has been in an accident or a loved one has died. You know, to accept God's will, we must believe that He knows what He is doing. A woman tells this story. She said she told her 5-year-old son that she was going to have a baby. And the kid thought about how he already had 4 sisters, so he said, "Mommy, I choose a boy." Well, she smiled and she said, "Honey, I can't choose and you can't choose." And he said, "Well, who chooses then?" And she said, "God chooses." And the mother said her son was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Well, that's all right then, because God knows we have enough girls in this family and we need another boy." You know what? I call that trusting in God, believing that He knows what we need, believing that He knows what is best for us. And when you come right down to it, believing that it will all turn out well because it will turn out the way He wants it to. You know, I spent 2 years in our novitiate, our Vincentian novitiate, 1 year right here in this house. You know, the novitiate was the place that made me the holy, humble priest that I am today. It was also the place where we were told to do God's will, to accept God's will. And we were told that that meant we should always accept what happens to us and not second-guess God or get upset with God when something so-called bad happens to us, when something difficult happens to us. You know, they do tell the story of a little girl who was preparing to go to bed at night one evening, and it was a terrible stormy night. There was lightning and thunder. The lights in the house began to flicker, and obviously she was terrified. Immediately, she knelt down by her bed, and she prayed. And this was her prayer: "Dear God, please don't let it thunder and lightning anymore, and please don't let the lights go out." But after a brief pause, she said, "But I just thought it over, God, and you know what? You can do whatever you want. Amen." Folks, that is what I learned in the novitiate. To let God do whatever He wants without complaining, without getting upset. You know, some time ago I gave a homily on what I'm talking about right now, accepting God's will. And after Mass, a woman came up to me and told me that her husband was dying of cancer. And she said, "Father, how can I accept this as God's will?" And the thought comes to me, it's difficult to accept God's will at any time, but especially when a loved one is dying or has died. I'd like to share with you now a few thoughts about perhaps how to accept God's will when a loved one is dying or dies. I came across this little anecdote recently. A local funeral home offered an opportunity to families to begin the service with some music, a hymn from a CD. And one family asked that the funeral director play Elvis Presley's hit, "Love Me Tender," because it was the favorite song of their deceased loved one. Well, on the day of the funeral, the music was started, ready for the family to begin the service. Unfortunately, the funeral director made a mistake. He picked out the wrong track, as they call it, on the CD. And the family found themselves walking into the service, listening to Elvis Presley sing "Return to Sender." Okay, folks, we can smile at this, but you know what? It's a wonderful thought to have when we bid farewell, so to speak, to a loved one who has died. I think we will be able to accept God's will if we truly believe, that we are sending our loved one, returning our loved one back to their sender, to God, who put our loved one on the earth the day they were born. We are entrusting them to God in the kingdom of heaven. A woman tells this story. She said she and her son were looking through a family photo album, and her 4-year-old son pointed to a woman who had a big smile on her face. And he asked her who she was. And the mother said, "Oh, that's my dad's mother, your great-grandmother." She explained how the photo had been taken a long time ago and that now she was dead. And the boy looked puzzled for a moment and said, "She's dead? Then why is she smiling?" Yep, great-grandmother was smiling in the photo when it was taken many years ago. I'm sure that she was smiling after she died, when she found herself in the kingdom of heaven. And that is how we should think about a loved one who has died, with a smile on their face. You know why? Because they have an awful lot to smile about. They are in a place where there's no more cancer, no more heart disease, no more Alzheimer's, no more illness of any kind, no more worries, no more problems, no more sufferings. They're smiling because they are with Jesus and our Blessed Mother. They are once again with their loved ones who had gone before them. And you know what? They will be with them for all eternity. And that's a lot to smile about. Finally, here is another reason why I think we can accept God's will when a loved one dies. My dad never liked to say the word goodbye. He felt as if that word was too final, as they say. So when I or anyone else would visit him and be ready to leave, he always went through the same ritual. He would stand in the driveway as we went out in the car, and he would yell out, "See you later." After my dad died, I said the prayers at his burial. And the last thing I said, and it was to myself pretty much, when I looked at the casket, I said, "See you later, Dad." Because I do have the faith to believe that we will see our loved ones again in the kingdom of heaven. And that's another good reason why to accept God's will when a loved one dies. So let's continue our Mass. Let's thank our Blessed Mother for saying fiat, for saying yes to God. And let us ask her to help us to say the same, to say what her Son said the night before he died. Thy will, not my will, be done.